feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another full episode of the Off the Wall podcast here at Total Apex Sports. I'm Chris, alongside, as always, my co-host Brandon. How's your night going today, man?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Just watched Rory McIlroy go back to back at Augusta. Was a fun Masters weekend. But let's get into some baseball. The baseball's been fun this weekend too. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. We're starting to get a little bit of a sample size with all these teams here and getting a little bit more of an idea of what teams are headed where, get some more warming up a little bit. The weather's getting nicer, all that good stuff. It's starting to really feel like baseball season. All right, so first up, there's been a whole slew of different injuries that come up. So I didn't want to highlight every single injury that's come up for every team at this point because we'd be drowning. That could take a whole hour right there. But are there any specific ones you want to highlight that you think are really key for their teams?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight the Adley Rutschman foot, or the Adley Rutschman 10-day DL ankle. It was out of the blue right before the second game in the Giants series that Rutschman had an ankle inflammation and his I think his right foot. I think it was. They were saying in Baltimore, and he's now on the 10-day DL, but IL. I have to get used to saying IL. They changed that, but the 10-day IL. But now Sam Basallo had a home run today, so I feel like it with Basallo catching every day, this might get him hot at the plate, and then when Adley comes back, and hopefully he continues his hot streak. And Basallo continues his hitting as well. The Orioles' offense will be just fine until Adley comes back. Pete finally got some big hits today as well. We'll get into K. Povich a little bit later when we actually talk about the standings and what they mean how it is. But that's the one I wanted to highlight is Adley Rutschman. That's a big one. Also, Ryan Mountcastle. Unfortunate, he was rounding second in that game on Saturday night, rounding first, going to second on a double, and he twisted they're saying it's a foot. So he might be going to the IL as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. And I think it was there's another pitcher for the O's that's going to the IL too. I was
going to say, I believe you got dropped to 12 players on the IL now. Something incredible. Yeah. You guys have really had a rough go of it. A couple others I wanted to highlight for the Houston Astros have also gotten hit pretty hard. Obviously, their ace Hunter Brown went down, which isn't. I mean, unfortunately for him, he's had a lot of injury issues in his career. And in fact, that whole Astros rotation has had some questions, or a lot of them have had questions health-wise. But that's a big blow for them because he's sort of their true anchor, right? And then also, Pena was out with a knee. We don't know how long yet that's going to be. Correa has an illness, so he should be back soon. But still, the Astros are battling some of their best players. And up for a team that sort of lost a lot of their stars, they can only weather so many hits there as well. So they're struggling. Then there's another one I want to bring up, but we're actually going to cover it with the Eloy Jimenez call-up. So I'll wait on that one. And then today for the Padres, who have been – great. I know Nick Pivetta, a former Red Sox, he got scratched from his start just when it looked like he was starting to figure out, some of the magic that he had last year, which is a tough blow for the Padres because much like, Houston, they've lost some of their stars and they've, we talked about Mason Miller on an earlier little taping that we did earlier today, but, they traded pretty much any other prospect they had. He left in their farm system for Mason Miller. At this point, it's bone dry. So they don't have the ability. They don't have the depth, to replace some of the starters that they really are counting on, like a Pavetta. So we'll see what ends up happening with him. It was officially listed as elbow soreness, which is
Yeah.
never what you want to hear. That usually ends up playing for something a lot worse. But hopefully he'll be okay. But we'll see. That just came out, earlier today. So we'll see what happens there. Speaking of the Padres, I think this is a good transition. They had 2 walk-offs against the Rockies the last couple of games. Former Red Sox announcer Don Orsillo had a couple of iconic calls.
Definitely for sure.
Diego call,
Holy cheats. Holy cheats.
Absolutely fantastic. I will forever say he's the best announcer in the game. He's absolutely brilliant. But what did you think of those walk-offs for the Padres, and what do you think about what they're putting together then right now?
I think the Padres give the Dodgers a legit. They do it every year. It makes you think about the Padres for the first about 3 or 4 months that they can actually contend with LA and actually stay with LA. And I think this year they can actually stay with LA again to make it interesting in the NL West. But at the same time, for me, I just know in the end it's fool's gold. They'll get the wild card and get that spot, but that wild card spot. But I just don't know if they'll win the division and have secure playoff positioning. They're a great team. I like what Manny has done this season. Manny Machado has done this season thus far. Obviously, we talked about Mason Miller earlier on that little recording. But he has phenomenal season thus far. Please watch that when it goes live. Please watch that Mason Miller thing. It is good content there. Just wanted to shout that out real quick.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I like what the Padres are doing right now. They're one of the best teams right now in the NL, I feel. And it's going to be a long season, but I feel like they can make it interesting down the road. So
yeah, I agree. I think they're a good underdog team, to give a run to the Dodgers. I do think they'll make the playoffs. I think the Dodgers are going to win that division. I've said that for a while, and I mean, we're going to talk about this a little bit later with the standings too. But the Dodgers just seem like a class of their own at this point. They really do. So that's hard. But the Padres are certainly a fun team. They've got the lineup that's capable to do it. They certainly have the bullpen. There are some questions about that rotation, whether it can hold up for the full season. And obviously, like I said, with the Pavetta injury, that could only add to questions there. But I think they have the pieces that they need to make a good run for it. And I like seeing them, they started off a bit slow. And since then they've started to heat up a bit. Playing the Red Sox, it seemed to help them, as it seems like most teams have had. And since then, they've been doing a lot better. Of course, they're playing the Rockies, and this week they've been sweeping them. But it is the Rockies, you know what I mean? So we'll see how they do against the better teams. The other injury that I was alluding to earlier was the injury to George Springer with Toronto, and obviously it came out they've called up Eloy Jimenez to replace him right now, former White Sox, who had a solid start to his career and then kind of fell off, not dissimilar to Tim Anderson did, the shortstop, who was also for the White Sox. So what do you think about this call? Do you think Eloy has anything left in the tank to help the Blue Jays?
I think Eloy, it might be a desperation thing for Toronto at this point to try to keep up with those 3 teams at top. To try to get Eloy, like the old Eloy, back. But I don't know if it's going to work out. It's a wait and see process for me with Eloy Jimenez right now. So,
yeah, I agree. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I'd love to see, some semblance of him come back. I mean, he was an exciting player. He's always, the flaws that he's had have always been very glaring. You know what I mean? So that's why he was never a true superstar. But he has the power potential for sure to be an impact bat for that lineup. But going from George Springer to the potential corpse of Eloy Jimenez is not ideal for the Blue Jays, especially as a team that sort of, last year, one of the biggest things for them in their run to the World Series was their depth, and the depth here is being tested early, and we'll see where that depth goes. It seems like, they could have could become very worrisome very quickly if some of their players don't get healthy, especially, obviously in that outfield. All right, a couple other just quick hits. The Royals starting pitching, we could talk about that a little bit more during the next segment we have, but
Yep.
just a quick highlight of how impressive they've been. We'll cover that a bit more, but they've been absolutely lights out as a starting pitching. It's too bad the rest of their team has not put it together, but certainly their starting pitching has been unreal,
Yeah.
for them, and then also another sort of impressive pitching side, LaGrange down in the minor leagues. I believe he's in AAA right now. Yes, he's in
Mm-hmm.
AAA right now, and a starting pitcher who was popping 102. He hit it 9 times during the game earlier this week,
Yeah.
which is that's like Hunter Green level of velocity as a starting pitcher. Now, obviously, Hunter Green has had health issues as a result
Yeah.
of some of his velocity there. So, Lagrange, there's some concerns there if he continues to throw at that level. But
Yeah.
what do you think, just in general, with pitching? And again, we'll cover this more when we cover pitching specifically. But we've seen more and more pitchers throwing 100, 101, 102 consistently, and not just relievers. For a while, it was relievers. Now we see it out of starting pitchers as well. What are your thoughts on that sort of shift, I guess, in baseball?
I feel like that's the guys throwing high velocity, are going to eventually start leading unless they do the Paul Skeens warm up every time out, which that meant, like, if you haven't watched those like videos on Paul Skeens' warm up, you should. And like, if you're like a high schooler trying to be like a great prospect one day, you should watch those Paul Skeens if you already haven't, because it saves your arm in the end, because it gets all the muscles that require to throw that hard consistently. And to be honest, I don't think Paul Skeens will ever get a Tommy John injury because of his warm up that he does. I just don't see it in the cards. Now, obviously, something freaky could happen. It's baseball, and pitching mechanics could go awry every once in a while, and something like that could happen. Anything's possible, but I would be shocked if Paul, because of how much time he takes in those warm, like before every start, the stretches he does, the water tank, throwing the football, all that stuff that he does to get all the muscle groups, the abductor region, his hips, his shoulders, his core working together to throw 100, 101, consistently. And a lot of these younger guys that don't do that, you see a lot of the Tommy John stuff.
Exactly.
Mason Miller, I think, like Mason Miller, for example, I think he does something. I don't know if he does the full thing that Paul Skeens does, but he does something similar, and he hasn't had an injury yet.
Yeah.
So
it's for Mason Miller too, right? Is as a bullpen, he only has to do that for 1 inning, potentially maybe 2, if you're really stretching your closer. For a guy like Paul Skeens, he's going 6, 7 innings trying to maintain that velocity over 100 some odd pitches. I think that's what hurts Hunter Green. He doesn't have that same workup, doesn't have that same sort of stretch out, and he's trying to throw 102 miles an hour in the 7th inning, the same way he is in the 1st inning, and it puts too much pressure on that elbow. Your body's doing something so unnatural already in a way, that you have to have your body be built up to being used to withstanding that kind of, stretching on your body and the pressure it's putting on your body. And a lot of the young kids, I think, feel the pressure to be upping their velocity because that's sort of where the game's moving, so they're trying to throw harder and harder, and they're not really built to do that. They're not really prepared to do that. They're not really, getting the support for doing that. And that's why we see so many more injuries in pitching in general, not just minor leaguers, major leaguers too. We've seen way more, injuries to pitchers the last few years than we have in a long time, So
exactly. I was going to bring up too, Pedro Martinez, when he was on MLB Network when he was a an analyst for MLB Network, had a thing on like the UCL and the forearm and all that stuff.
Mm.
Because the ligaments, he was saying the ligaments that people would like, he trained, like the reason he never got hurt, his arm was always straight and everything like that, because he trained those ligaments. He said a lot of guys do the bench press and all that stuff, but no, there's specific exercises that train those ligaments as well. That I have to find the video, but that video from Pedro Martinez back in the day, I think it was about 2018 or 2017, something like that, when he was on that segment.
Yeah.
And it's still poignant today because you still see those injuries. Because that's why Pedro Martinez never, and he threw high 90s in his career. He didn't throw 100, but he threw high 90s for a bulk of his career.
Yeah.
So that's another example of a guy that took care of his body.
Exactly.
Make sure he was able to handle the velocity that he had. So
yeah, and at the time, that velocity was considered crazy too. I mean, like really high velocity during Pedro's day was 96 to 98. That was seen as like rare and uncommon. I remember the first time somebody hit 100 in a game, and it was like mind blowing. And now it's almost the expectation if you're going to be a top line pitcher to come up with 100, have that in your arsenal. It's crazy to see how fast, only 15 years or so in the game has shifted everything. All right, really quickly, Jordan Walker leading the league in home runs now with 6 in his last 8 games. Obviously that it's funny.
I would Gunnar Henderson. I just want to make sure. Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead. I mean, go ahead through that point, but I just want to make sure Gunnar. I'd shout out Gunnar. Gunner's at 6 as well. So.
He does. So tied for the lead, right? Yeah, tied for the lead. But 6 home runs in 8 games, and he had 6 in 330 something at bats last season, I believe, and now he has 6 in his first 36, I believe it is, or somewhere around there, 38 this season. So, what do you think is attributing to such a change? Have you seen anything mechanically that he's changed, or do you think it just pitching now, or what do you think's going on there?
I think he's finally got, because it takes some guys some time to get adjusted to MLB hitting in their careers. There's a guy by the name of I'm trying to think. No one is going to be Ichiro Suzuki who can come into the league and take the league by storm when it comes to contact, this, that, and the other, and everything like that. There's no one that's going to be the next Ichiro Suzuki when it comes to that, or Shohei Ohtani coming in right away. You still have to have adjustment periods to the hitting. And my thing is, I think Walker has finally had some mechanical changes to his swing a little bit, and it's helped him. From what I don't know for sure, that's the thing, but that's my theory, is something was changed with his, his timing and his swing. And I think it's a combination of everything. To see a guy that had the raw potential to be one of the best prospects in baseball and have his struggles the first couple of years of his career, and now is being fruitful in St. Louis, is a crazy, unpredictable story that we didn't see coming heading into the 2026 season. So,
absolutely, I agree with that. And it's a reminder for people. Prospect. We talk about it all the time in baseball, really, that prospect growth is not linear, right? Prospect development is not linear. I think we're used to in all three, really, of the other sports, especially football and basketball, players just get inserted in right away. They, pretty much are thrown to the wolves. Maybe in football, quarterbacks, get a little bit of development time unless you're the first overall pick, in which case you're kind of expected to sort of, go in there and lead the team immediately. But by and large, baseball has by far the longest window of development, and so we look at these minor leaguers, and they show eye-popping numbers, and we're ready for them to come up to the majors. But the jump from AAA to major leagues is so dramatically drastic. And some players can do it right away, and some players need more time. And I think we often give up on these prospects, after they come up. If they struggle for a year, or they struggle for half a year, or they struggle for a couple months, when they come up, we say, oh, they're not well, they were misvalued or devalued or wrongfully, oh, they aren't really prospects, and that's why
Right.
people sort of, eliminate, oh, prospects don't matter, minor league system doesn't matter, for the general public. But it's a reminder that just because somebody didn't come up right away does not mean that they're not going to be, a successful major leaguer. Obviously, one of the biggest names recently, as far as like a number one rated prospect, is Spencer Torkelson, out of Detroit. Took a few years to sort of get going, but then last year sort of finally started to figure it out a little bit, But it's just a reminder again, these prospects are young. These are
Yeah.
young players. They're coming up sometimes, 6, 7, 8 years younger than league average. I
Yeah.
mean, and they're competing against some of the best of the best. And so it's a reminder to give people, give these players a little bit of grace and let them develop into their position, and some teams have the ability to do that more than others too, of course. If you're in a
Yes.
pennant race, it's a lot harder to give a rookie, the leeway than if you're a rebuilding team, like somebody like St. Louis is. But all right. Really quickly, we'll cover this more again when we get to standings. But the Rays sweeping the Yankees made the AL East very interesting this week. We'll cover that a little bit more when we get into the standings.
Yes.
Andrew Painter moving to the bullpen
Yeah.
from Philly. He was dominant in the bullpen, but that is
Hmm.
an interesting development there.
Yeah.
We can cover that a little bit more when we get to pitching too. But any quick thoughts on that they're sort of shifting him to the bullpen?
I think that might be a good move for him, and like we've been talking about with Roki Sasaki, I think some guys might be better in the bullpen. I think Pater might be a better bullpen guy in the end of the day. I know Philly wanted him to be a back end starter. He had a good outing his debut, but I don't think. I cut out. I cut out. No.
Yeah, there we go. All right, you're back. You're back. I
Cut
got
out.
you. We're good.
I saw it halfway through. So I
It's all
was
right.
saying, I was saying with that, the rookie Sasaki stuff is, it's kind of similar to what the Dodgers should be doing with rookie Sasaki. The Phillies wanted him to be a bullpen guy or a starter, a back end starter in their rotation. But yeah, it's crazy to see Andrew Painter and Jerry. We've been doing good, man. We've been doing good. I saw your comment earlier. We're doing good, but yeah, in and out. That's what I am. The internet right now is kind of spotty, but Andrew Painter, it might be better for him in the long haul, and Philly might be better too as a team because of they need some bullpen help. And if Painter thrives in that role, I think that they'll be better for it. So we'll see what happens.
For sure. And they're the type of team that can, they have the depth at starting pitching and the top end talent there, and they have for a long time struggled with that bullpen. So if he can maintain, he looked dominant out of the bullpen early since after they shifted him there. So if he can keep that up, that could be a real asset for them in the long run. And as we saw with somebody like Mason Miller, the bullpen matters a lot more now than it has previously, just because starters aren't going as long into games. You're only getting 5-6 innings out of them, and you're expecting the bullpen to make up the difference. And so we're seeing relievers become more and more valuable. So that could be a big difference maker for the Phillies. Quickly, a couple hitting streaks and we still got going on. O'Neal Cruz just hit an 11-game hitting streak. Just reached that. Shohei Ohtani is continuing his streak. He's now up to 45 straight games on base streak, and that's while also being a pitcher, once every 5 days. I mean, we talk about it all the time. There's not much more to say about him, but he just incredible. But it's cool to see O'Neal Cruz at least having, some offensive success. Obviously, we talked about his defense is still, sometimes leaves something to be desired. But the Pirates will take that offense all day. That's really what he's there for. He's in that lineup to be their big bat. And so he's panning out that way. Another interesting thing happened. I don't know if you saw this with St. Louis, but Marmol, the coach, was able to successfully challenge a challenge in this weekend's games.
That's crazy. Definitely challenge a challenge. That is crazy. That is insane. So go into it a little bit more because I didn't really see this.
Absolutely.
Go into it a little bit more for me real quick because I want to know.
Yeah. So basically, so it was he didn't like so I didn't fully see it either. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm gonna try to pull up a little bit of summary for you. While I'm doing that really quickly, the one other thing I missed on the Padres was Tatis playing second base now for
Yeah.
them. So they're moving him around again. If you want to cover that really quickly, what are your thoughts on that? And I'll pull up a little bit more information about
Yeah,
the
pull up the Marmota thing. Tatis playing second is an interesting development. I feel like Tatis is a better outfielder defensively. But I guess because of the injuries they have in San Diego, I'm guessing that's why he's playing second right now. I would have to guess that's why. But I feel like he's a better outfielder defensively because when he was at shortstop to start his career, he had issues in the infield defensively. And now with him in the outfield, it's been a better, more successful situation defensively. So I'm concerned about it, but you have to have you have to have a second baseman. And I think right now, I think it's they still have Cronenworth, who's been out, right, with an injury.
Yeah.
I think it's it's Cronenworth. And I guess until he comes back, Tatis will play second. Second is not that major of a fielding, liability, I should say. It doesn't have you can be a little bit of liability out there at second, because of the short throw to first, compared to third base and shortstop. So that's, the fielding is my only concern, but Tatis playing second, it's an emergency situation. I'm assuming on that.
Yeah, exactly. And he has experience obviously at shortstop, so it's not a drastic move for him. He wasn't an awful defensive shortstop, necessarily. Right. He wasn't great, but he wasn't awful. So he has some experience in the infield. I think if this was a few years ago, second base would have even less defensive value because of the ability to shift. With that changing in the last CBA, there's a little more pressure there as far as range. Yeah. But he has the speed. Range has never really been much of his issue anyway, so I think he'll be okay there. But it is interesting to see them moving him around again, as opposed to somebody else. So we'll see, how, hopefully, it's just a couple game thing or whatever, we won't be doing that long. All right, as far as the challenge of the challenge, okay, so I knew it had to do with the hit by pitch. I just wanted to make sure I got the exact details right. So basically, it was against the Red Sox. Weiser came out of the bullpen, and he hit Jose Fairman, they claimed he got hit. Red Sox felt he did not get hit and immediately challenged him getting hit by a pitch, right? As it turns out, he was not hit by a pitch. That is true, but the replay took a really long time for them to ultimately make that decision. And so what happened during that time, Marmol took a look at the replay and realized that he felt that the batter, Furman's bat, hit the catcher, Carlos Narvaez's glove. And so after the call was overturned, he came out and challenged and said, well, actually, I'm challenging this play now, too. It's actually a catcher interference. So they had to go back in, look at the play again, and then they, in fact, did call catcher interference. And so the runner ultimately got first base anyways. So that's what the challenge ended up being. So in the long run, same result, but in a totally different way. Yeah.
Different circumstance. That is insane. That is an insane situation. But good for Marmol to do that. Good heads up awareness by Marmol. First off,
absolutely
makes managers' jobs so complex and difficult in baseball at times. He's when to challenge certain things. It's crazy, and because now if you get an ABS call wrong, it takes away one of your regular challenges you have too. Like that's the thing. It takes a challenge. And then if you fail a challenge, you're out of ABS not only you're out of ABS challenge, but you're out of regular challenge. If you fail to if you fail an ABS and then fail a challenge, you're out of challenges the rest of the game. So until the extra innings. So it's a difficult situation to, and that would, it might have been trivial for him to do that, but at the same time, props to him for getting the making sure they got every detail of the call right. So
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's something that's very, very unique, and it has to have a very unique set of things going on, right? Just the perfect storm
yeah,
event to be able to have that happen. But certainly was an interesting thing to see.
yeah.
100%. Before we move on to the next topic, did you have any other news or anything that you sort of seen throughout the week at all? Anything you want to touch?
I don't think so. I mean, Trout got hit by a foul ball yesterday. In from Soler, there was that, but he stayed in the game, so it's not really big news. I mean, he was able to stay in the game and still play and not be injured. But it was a scare for the Angels and Angels fans that he got hit by his own teammate's foul ball when he was on third. But other than that, I don't think there's any really big discussion points other than what we'll get into with the pitching here. So let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All righty. So this year's pitching, I pulled up a sort of, this is from Fangraph, the stats that you see on the screen here. As far as I took the 10 previous seasons before this season as sort of a benchmark for how pitching has done over the course of the last 10 years statistically. And
Yeah,
I found it interesting because the way I was looking at it this season, I felt like there was a whole bunch of like stars right at the top, right? Like I see more, especially in the National League, more potential names you could mention in the Cy Young award race than I remember in recent memory. Now, obviously, this is 3 weeks in. This is a
yeah,
big caveat, is it's incredibly small sample size. And I understand that, right? But I just see a lot of names out there sort of anchoring their rotations and having fantastic seasons so far, and then a whole bunch of mediocrity behind that. And so
yeah,
I wanted to look at, the stats, and as the stats point out, it pretty comparable to the previous seasons, right? I would say strikeouts are slightly down and walks are slightly up for pitching, but by and large, the stats look fairly similar. So I'm curious your thoughts. Do you think this season is top heavy with the pitchers, or is it just like recency bias and short sample size that is clouding my judgment here?
well, that's the thing too. With when you bring up the strikeouts and walks, I think that's the ABS effect a little bit with
Mm-hmm.
walks being higher because teams being able to challenge
Mm-hmm.
that and batters getting more benefit of the doubt um, at
Absolutely.
the plate now with the ABS. So I think that's something else too. I know, but even though here's the thing, I think catchers are still more successful than batters have been so far in ABS that I saw. So far, so the catchers are getting more love from the ABS than because they know how to frame the strike zone and they know what the strike zone is as a catcher. But batters are close behind the catchers, so I could see that's why the walks are up. But to bring the overall theme of this question, I think it's just a short recency bias thing. But the thing is, we do have so many top elite pitchers that I think that trend could continue into the rest of 2026 because of how many teams have top end guys, but they don't have the 3, 4, 5 guys anymore. Overall, we're not seeing the Braves, for instance, Smoltz, Maddox, and Glavine anymore. Like 3 consistent guys that you can try it out there and you'll get results. You're not the only team that has that's LA right now. That's really, but at the same time, there's still inconsistencies in the LA rotation on their 4 and 5 guys right now. And also, too, when you really do think about it too, a lot of the pitchers nowadays only go 4 or 5 innings anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Now because of bullpen, like they use the bullpen more nowadays than they did back in the mid 2000s when you see a lot more complete games than you do now. So it's just an interesting dynamic with how the game's evolved in today's world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And that's sort of what I was gonna ask you is do you think some of the reason for not having a real, a lot of teams that have a truly consistent 3-4-5, maybe not ace level 3-4-5, I mean, arguably the Dodgers, you could argue, are close to having that. Maybe Seattle, although Seattle have not seen the results they'd want to, but on paper, they appear to be a team that would have a legitimate 1-5. But I was just about to say I attribute some of that to the bullpen, right? And the
Yeah.
need for the bullpen, right? It feels like a lot of the guys that would sort of slot into there, or potentially slot into there, have been
Yeah.
slid into key bullpen roles early instead. I think of obviously I know more about the Red Sox as a team that I follow than any other team, right? And somebody like a Whitlock, right?
Yeah.
Is that type of guy that they did try him in the rotation and he had some health issues, but he pitched fine in the rotation, but he's
Yeah.
dominant out of the bullpen. And so they've decided that his value, instead of he could be a number 4 starter, he could be a number 5 starter for the Red Sox. I think he'd be perfectly capable, but they find more value in having him in that bullpen as the 8th guy, setting up Aroldis Chapman, where he's been dominant. Right. And it worked out.
Yeah.
If you look at last year, they finally made the playoffs again because they fixed their bullpen issues that had plagued them for the previous 3, 4, 5 seasons. Really,
Yeah.
You look at back in 2018 when the Red Sox won the World Series. Alex Cora, part of what earned Alex Cora the credit of being such an amazing coach was the way he managed that bullpen, that
Yeah.
playoff run, and how he decided to say, okay, the starters have bullpens. Why not just use the starters' bullpen days as an actual bullpen in the real game? Right. And that was revolutionary at the time. And it was because those starters, they brought value in that bullpen. Right. And I think that's what people started shifting, the thought process behind starting pitching and bullpen and really started to begin to pay attention more to how much value that a good starting pitcher can bring to the bullpen and become a great or even elite level, bullpen pitcher. Right. And do you think that's some of what's going on here? Do you agree with that statement?
I agree with you because that's the thing. The bullpen has become, you win games in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. And if you don't have arms that can get you through the 7th, 8th, and 9th, and you feel confident, you're not going to win that many games in baseball. You're not going to win the game in the first 3 innings. So you can lose a game in the first 3 innings if you have bad starting pitching, or bad offense, but you can't win the game in the first 3 innings. You have to keep the pressure on offensively or have great pitching to get through the whole game, especially 7th, 8th, and 9th. So if you have a solid bullpen, that's when it will win you games, especially in postseason play. So that's where we're going to get. I think that's where the game's been shifted to, thanks to the Tampa Bay's that farm system and how they've treated the bullpen. As we'll get into here with the Rays sweep in New York this weekend, that is a sign that New York doesn't have the greatest starting pitching right now, and their bullpen's inconsistent. And I just want to shout out Chandler Simpson real quick too, hitting 400 right now, leading the American League.
Absolutely.
1 steal behind Bobby Witt. Yeah, Chandler Simpson is a dark horse all-star contender this year. He's a sneaky all-star contender. Even though he doesn't hit for bombs, and I think that's where everyone's going to vote for in the all-star game, but he'll probably be a reserve because the coaches look at what he's doing contact-wise, and it's so electric. I like what Chandler Simpson's doing. But to get back on this pitching real quick before we get to the standings, like I said, bullpen, like we said, bullpen is the key to baseball nowadays, more so than starting pitching, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And then
which brings me to another interesting point. And I briefly alluded to it in our opening, but the Royals starting pitching rotation right now, right? And sort of they almost seem like they have a little bit of an opposite approach, is what we're talking about, right? Where they've sort of put all their eggs in the starting pitching basket a little bit,
Yeah.
and it hasn't, we'll look at them a little bit in the when we talk to the standings, but it hasn't fully panned out for them despite them having such amazing starting pitching numbers, right? I mean, we've got Michael Walker,
Yeah.
who just threw an 8 inning shutout, who lowers his ERA to MLB best, right, at a 0.43. So
Yeah.
he's anchoring that rotation. But actually, the entire team as a whole, I believe, coming into this game, it looks like they did not have a great game this game against the White Sox. But
Hmm.
before that, they had about a 250 ERA or so, which was one of the best in the league. And yet they're 7-8. And as of right now, if the score stays about to become 7-9,
Yeah.
despite having such a dominant rotation. And now, obviously, part of that could be attributed to their offense. And we talked about their offense a little bit on previous podcasts, just looking
Yeah.
abysmal. Really.
Struggling. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
struggling for the Kansas City Royals this year. So I think the get into the Kansas City Royals argument of this, like their rotation is great. Like I would
Mhm.
for this season. But the problem is when they take those guys out, they can't get outs in their bullpen and the offensively right now it's not flowing with that lineup they got, and these guys have to feel like every pitch has to be the perfect pitch, and that's when pitching goes bad when every pitch has to be the perfect pitch. You can't
Absolutely.
get in a rhythm, you can't get into proper sequencing of pitches. Um,
Mhm.
it's a wild thing of baseball, man. It's just you have to learn how to sequence pitches.
Mhm.
If you don't sequence your pitches well, the hitters will time you up, and
Mhm.
that's the problem. It's
Yeah.
if you throw like three straight fastballs, eventually if you throw a fourth one, the hitter's gonna you time you up eventually.
Mhm.
So you have to like the sequence location, sequence pitch types, all that stuff, and that's the problem in Kansas City right now. It's just every pitch has to be that perfect pitch to get the outs, and sometimes you have to give up the contact, and when they give up the contact, it's just hard hit into places
Yeah.
that the defense isn't, and that's
Exactly.
the thing. And the Kansas City bats ain't finding those places themselves, so that's the
Mhm.
thing. So
Which puts
I
even
feel
more
like
pressure on the pitching.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a cycle, and it's disappointing to be if you're a Kansas City fan and wondering what's going on with this offense. And Bobby Witt's still stealing bags, but and getting on base and trying to set the table at the top of the order. But the guys like Vinny Pasquantino and Jack Caglione and guys and Salvi and guys like that aren't following it up and getting enough run support. So
Mhm. Exactly.
it's just a weird dynamic right now in Kansas City, and it's unfortunate when you really think about it in the grand scheme of things.
Mhm.
Because I expected Kansas City to be second behind Detroit in the division. I just don't know I don't know if they're going to end up living to that hype.
Yeah.
To me, I think
I agree.
I thought they were poised to make and I feel like Cleveland's that team right now with how the Lauder's been hitting, Martinez has been hitting,
Yeah.
and their pitching, has been good so far. So I feel like Cleveland stole that thunder of Kansas City a little bit so far, and we didn't expect it once again from the Cleveland Indians, and it's what they do
Yeah.
every year. So
I agree. They were the team that was the sort of the surprise slide in there into the playoffs last year, and everybody wanted to see them build upon it this year, and it hasn't quite happened. Although, as we're going to talk about with the standings, this season maybe more than any other, at least to start the season, has been incredibly, there's been an incredible amount of parity because so many teams are clumped right around that 500 mark, right?
yeah,
And I apologize that these standings are a little bit small. I was hoping they would come in a little bit bigger, but really outside of the Dodgers, almost every division is only being led by like a game or two. The
yeah,
teams that are winning the division are 9-6, 9-7. A team like Kansas City that's 7-8. Is right there in the clump. I mean, I want to say, you know, 3/4 almost of the teams in the league right now are somewhere between 6 and 9 to 9-6. Like that's
Yep.
almost the entire league at this
Yep.
point, right? So
Yep.
nobody
Exactly.
outside of,
San Diego.
obviously, San
San
Diego,
Diego and LA.
Dodgers.
Yeah.
Yep. Are the
Yep.
only two teams really above that. And then obviously on the flip side, the bad teams, White Sox and Colorado, San Francisco, but everybody else, Houston, although that again has to do somewhat with their injuries too,
Yep.
right? But every other team is within that range, right? So there's
Yeah.
5, I think we named what, 5, 6, I think, teams out of 30.
Yeah.
So yeah, 80% of the league is in that one clump, right?
Yeah.
And so that's that just speaks to both, the strengths of teams and the flaws of their teams. Like there is no real team right now, again outside of NL West that really can sit there and say that they don't have made some major glaring issue in some capacity, right?
Yeah.
And I'd love to start us off talking about the AL East here, and we can start with, I know you had some stuff to cover with Baltimore, and then we obviously also want to cover the sweep of the Yankees by the Rays here, but what are your thoughts on how this is impacting the AL East?
So Baltimore today, Povich had on his 26th birthday had his probably his best start of his career. He went 6 2/3, only 1 run ball, a couple hits. Was solid throughout the day. The young lefty for Baltimore, shut down the Giants' offense pretty much the whole game. And like I said earlier, with the bats finally, with Pete Alonso's bat coming alive with 2 for 4 day, and Basallo finally getting back in the home run column, held 1 for 5 day, but he was making an impact on all fronts. Got a steal in the game, got a run. He was making plays. Taylor Ward continues to be impressive for the Orioles. And that's one of the underrated signings, trades of the offseason was trading Grayson Rodriguez for Taylor Ward. And even though Taylor Ward hasn't hit the home run ball like he did last year yet, he's been a doubles machine so far. So in Baltimore, so this is interesting to see what Taylor Ward, what this lineup will do if they keep getting hot. And they finally, it seems like they got hot for the most part in this Giant series. If they keep that up, they can maybe be in that Dodgers range if they just keep on, if they can stabilize the pitching a little bit, which gets into our Rays Yankees talk. The Yankees were one of those teams before that Rays Yankees series that was like we were talking about, like Dodgers, like one of the best teams in baseball. I think the Rays have kind of exposed the Yankees as one of the weakest, not a weaker rotation right now without Garrett Cole. So, for sure. So and it's really interesting how they did it too all weekend. So, if you want to get into that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tampa Bay, obviously they swept the Yankees. The Yankees have now lost 5 straight. But what's interesting about Tampa Bay is how they sort of small balled their way through this rotation, right? They weren't relying on what, sort of the modern baseball approach, right? Which is crushing home runs, striking out, the 3 true outcomes, right? Strike out, walk, home run. That's sort of the way the league had been moving recently. And Tampa Bay kind of has shifted that, right? They've been doing small ball rallies, right? Infield hits, capitalizing on the speed that they have in that lineup, right? Relying on their bullpen, relying on their starting pitching to sort of hold it together, right? Which is not the way we typically think of rallies, think of offenses operating in 2026, but yeah, they scored 2 runs in their game. I think it was today. Yeah, 2 runs where a total of all 3 of their hits traveled 13 feet total, I believe I read, between all 3 of their hits, right?
Geez.
I mean, that's the epitome of small ball, is just make contact and something can happen. You don't have to be swinging for the fences all the time. Just put it in play and see if something can happen. Use your other element. And that's exactly what Tampa Bay does. And, they're the type of team that's known for setting, where they don't have the money, they shift, they zig while everybody's zagging, right? They were the first team to start the bullpen game, right? When they didn't have the starting pitchers, and then everybody followed that because it was working. They started the opener idea. Everybody started following that. They were the ones that did the shift, which was so successful that it got outlawed in the game because it was so successful. And now it appears, they're building their roster a little bit differently than the rest of the league is. And in this case, against the Yankees, it worked, right? And that's sort of what I see out of the Rays is they take what they have and they make it work. They're not trying to be something they're not, right? They're just playing the hand that they're dealt. They're playing with the talent that they have, and they make it work for what they have,
Exactly.
And you can see it on display here against the Yankees for sure, which is why I said, the Rays were rated as the bottom team in this division. And I've said from the beginning, I would probably on paper rank them the bottom two, but I said, don't sleep on them. You can never sleep on these Rays because they find a way to do it. They figure something out. And it appears, they might have figured out how to make their roster work within the modern baseball landscape for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like I was talking about with Chandler Simpson earlier. He's the perfect epitome of that small ball kind of idea. Get on base, get the steal, get to scoring position, get to third, and then score, or he can score from a single. It's just crazy. So, but I think too, the parity is, get into the parity question. I think a lot of teams made some moves in the offseason anticipating the CBA, and stuff like that that spent a little bit more money than normal. And we've gotten this parity, and a lot of the teams' prospects are finally developed. Like Miami's, for instance, the Miami system's finally showing their signs of what they want it to be. They're a shocking team right now in the NL East, being second place behind Atlanta right now. And while you got teams like the Mets who spent, always have a high payroll, but they get hurt a lot. So, and without Juan Soto right now, I think their season's probably going to be in the tailspin until Juan Soto comes back. So, I think, I think that is why this is happening, is because of the teams anticipating the CBA. Obviously your bottom teams like Chicago and Colorado didn't spend much. But the thing is, everyone thought St. Louis was going to be a tanking team, and they're not. They're actually playing good baseball right now. Because of what they got rid of Nolan Arenado and a couple other key pieces. They're actually playing good baseball in St. Louis, which is crazy. But a team like Baltimore spent money this offseason. Normally they wouldn't spend the money. So they made the move for Shane Baz and extended them. Even though the Shane Baz move right now hasn't panned out like how the Orioles probably would have wanted it to. In his couple starts, he was the starter for that the one loss in the Giants series, but it's just at the same time, I think the parities, because I think teams are anticipating a lockout and they want to try to showcase, their talent this season. Now, granted, it is early. And also, I think a lot of these teams right now, they're surprising, like Miami and maybe Tampa Bay might bottom out. Once the other teams get, healthier, like Boston or like Toronto, like New York, maybe teams like that. And the one team, as I'll go ahead and answer my disappointing team right now in the Chicago Cubs. That is my most disappointing team right now. For me, is because we expected a lot of people were picking them to win the Central, in the preseason. And right now they're last. They're the only team really under 500 in the Central right now, which is crazy, which is insane to think about. Granted, it's one game below 500. It's 7-8. But that's the thing. Every other team is above 500. Including Cincinnati, 9-7. And the Pittsburgh Pirates are shockingly leading the division right now, 9-6. So the Central is going to be close all year. But I would just say I would have thought Chicago would have been maybe 10, 11 wins right now. To be honest with you, with how everyone was like picking them in the preseason, and they've been disappointing to see the list. It's either them or like we talked about with Kansas City. Those are my two the most disappointing teams right now. Is them two.
Yeah.
Obviously, yours is probably Boston. I would have to
Yeah.
guess, right?
I mean, there's no question that this start has been pretty abysmal for the Red Sox. There's no question. So they're definitely the most disappointing for me, just personally going in. That being said, are they a team that I'm fully worried about? Not yet. And the reason I say that is because, what had been their biggest issue has probably been their offense being inconsistent. I mean, they've had some hit or miss pitching performances, but by and large, the question has been their offense. And in the last two games, that offense has finally started to wake up. And it's come off the bat of Wilson Contreras, who's sort of in the middle of the order, kind of, I guess, the de facto offensive replacement for Alex Bregman, right? And everybody sort of said the Red Sox, they didn't really address their offense at all. And I agree with that. But I think the biggest bat they brought in was Wilson Contreras. And his last two games have shown why. When he's hitting, it completely changes the dynamic of that lineup, right? And so I want to see him do it a little bit more. I want to see that lineup do it a little bit more. But I think if they start to hit the way that they're capable of, and they start to hit the way they have the last two games, right? They've scored 16 runs the last two games. Then I think they're fine, and I think they can make up the ground. They're not super far behind, as we've said. The whole AL East has had a lot of injuries, which has helped the Red Sox stay afloat. Now, I will also say I think this is where the Red Sox need to capitalize more on those injuries. I think they should have built a lead, because I think all three of the teams ahead of them outside of, the Rays are going to get healthier and become better teams, and so I think this was the Red Sox chance to build a lead so they could weather some of those returns. And instead they're just trying to hang on, which is not ideal, but I'm not
keep up pace.
Exactly.
Try to keep
so
up
that's
the
not
pace.
Ideal, obviously, but I'm not super worried about them. I would say the team I'm most worried for, and I'm not sure they had a big, it's not like they came in with like major expectations, but I'm very worried for the San Francisco Giants. Not just because of their record, which is 6-10, obviously in a very tough division with the Dodgers and Padres. You can't lose ground very quickly with them. You have to stay competitive to have a shot there. And they have obviously Arizona there, which is always a dark horse. So they're already in one of the toughest divisions in baseball, right?
Yeah.
And outside of their record, there's been a lot of murmurs of a wrong hire at the managerial
spot. Yeah, with the Tennessee former Tennessee coach. Yep,
exactly. That's where my concern is. If murmurs are already happening about him and we're 15, 16 games into the season, that's not great. And that's why they worry me more than most of these other teams.
I think for me, with the Giants, I was going to say with the Giants real quick too, and I might bring it back to the Red Sox. Ask about Roman Anthony's arm in left field. Are you if you're concerned about that? But I'll go ahead on my Giants since we got into the Giants. The Giants situation. That was my major red flag is a guy that's never coached professional baseball and has only coached college. And you're hiring that guy as the guy to run the ship. And I just find it weird that you hired that guy to be as the manager. Now, Greg Abernathy for me as an Orioles guy has worked out. I like what he's done. I like the philosophy he's brought in. And I'm glad the Giants didn't hire a Greg Abernathy, even though he was with the Giants in their during the time of the franchise. So that's I'm glad about that, as the Orioles seem to have the right guy in place over to replace Brandon Hyde. But to get into my question, teams have been running on Roman Anthony's arm in left field, and the arm's not been great. Your thoughts on that, real quick, to go into more of the disappointment of the Red Sox, situation.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. I mean, this is a team that built itself. I mean, the roster construction was around pitching and defense and run suppression, right? That was sort of the whole philosophy. They said, okay, well, if we can't go out and get the big bats, we're going to focus on pitching and defense. And that's what Reslow sold the fans, right? And by and large, the defense has been solid. I would say the infield is certainly better than it's been in the past. I would say that there's still some issues there, but I definitely think it's a lot better than it was in the past. And I think the outfield defense, have three pieces that could be three of the best defenders in the league. The problem is one of those three is not Roman Anthony. And Roman Anthony has to be in the lineup because of the way that you built this team, right? He has to be there pretty much every day. The outcry of Red Sox fans when they benched Roman Anthony in the last series, was loud because he's the only bat that really has that sort of upside. And so you sort of pinned yourself into the corner where either you play him in left field, where he is clearly the worst option of the four defenders that you have in outfield by a fairly large degree, and teams know that. You can hide him a little bit at Fenway Park because of the short wall, but any other stadium, you can't really hide that arm,
Yeah.
And so either you sacrifice that defense there to get his offense in, or you have to stick him at DH, which at DHing your superstar to start his career is obviously not what you want to do. But you've set yourself up in a scenario where those are your only two real options, right? And by the fact that you've focused so much of your pitching around defense, right, and suppressing home runs, right, through ground ball contact or soft contact, right, that puts even more pressure on outfield arms too, right? And so I think that could become a real issue come the playoffs for the Red Sox. I don't think the roster was constructed well. I sort of said that from the beginning. I don't think they capitalized on where their strengths were. I don't think they filled their needs well. And I think it showed to start the season. Again, I think there's some things that are easy enough to fix. But by and large, I'm worried about Roman Anthony. And the other thing to point out is if you did stick Roman Anthony at DH, right, you got Masataka Yoshida, who's also an outfielder, who's even worse than Roman Anthony at defense. Where you put him, he was one of the only offensive bats that was actually performing worth a lick for most of the beginning of the season, right?
Yeah.
And so he actually does have some contact ability, and you lose him if you put Roman Anthony at DH. So it seems like, no matter what you kind of do there, you're in trouble. And I think the Red Sox are going to have to figure out what their plan is and what they're going to do with that. Because, I mean, and again, it goes back to, not wanting to give up on a prospect early either, right? But they're a team that because of the way they constructed their roster, they don't have the flexibility to sort of struggle through some of those defensive blows, and teams see that right away.
Yep. I think that's a good way to end this week's episode. Go ahead and promote your socials, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, you can check me out. I'm on pretty much every social media. My X account is right on the screen there, Christian B617. I've also got Instagram. I've got a TikTok. I've got pretty much any type of social media you have, Blue Sky, all those things, Threads. So you can follow me just about anywhere. I'll be posting articles on them more often, resharing some of the podcasts as well. And so definitely check me out. And then just in general, obviously checking out the site. And I know Brandon has some shout outs to give as well.
Yeah, so my X account's on the screen. I also have Instagram at _BEllis32. All lowercase, you'll see it. As well as remember to just follow all of our podcasts, like, comment, subscribe to this one, or to the channel and everything like that. And everything. And stay tuned for Tuesdays, Monday's gaming podcast and Tuesday's main show in the next couple of days, hopefully. And I was just going to say, have a good rest of your Sunday and peace out.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good rest of your Sunday, y'all. Make sure to keep checking us out and have a great one. Thanks, Brandon. Take care.
Yep, you too. At the wrong button.